Hi everyone, this is Max. I'm here with the European Time Zone Meetup group, and we are going to discuss today two poems. The first being Storm by HD. I am going to read the poem, and then we're going to open it up to discussion. This is Storm by HD. Storm. You crash over the trees. You crack the live branch. The branch is white, the green crushed. Each leaf is rent like split wood. You burden the trees with black drops. You swirl and crash. You have broken off a weighted leaf in the wind. It is hurled out, whirls up, and sinks, a green stone. So this is a pretty run-of-the-mill HD poem, I would say. But I think there's a lot we can do with it for sure. I mean, for those of you who have been following the ModPo course and or can get back in the headspace from a couple months ago about imagism. This is obviously like very much an imagist poem, and it's emphasis on non-human things and trying to describe, with various strategies like repetition and kinds of appeals to visual stimuli and so forth. But is there anything that stands out to anybody in particular about
This time round, it didn't seem very imagist. Reading it again, it seemed to be metaphorical.
Yeah, that's always
the you is a person
sure.
that has wrecked a life.
Mm-hmm. That's always right. This is the big debate that we have, of course, around imagism again and again, which is it possible to, in fact, do what the imagist poets had set out and desired to do, which is to have some sort of highly objective relationship to language, or at least that's what it seems to be from the imagist manifesto. And yet, whenever we read these, we tend to detect something metaphorical, something that seems to some meaning that seems to exceed what the meaning that the image itself supplies. Mona, did you have something to say?
Yeah, and this is something I didn't even think of the first time I read this poem, is that I questioned what the green gem was at the end, and I believe it's her heart.
Why would it be why does it lead you to say that it's her heart?
Because I believe, like Mike said, that the you is a person, and it's describing a crushing breakup, how someone betrayed the speaker, in my opinion. And it's just, it talks about more of that, and it talks about that in both stanzas. And what is hurled out and sinks is her heart, because that is what happens if you are in that kind of a relationship. You get that sinking feeling in your heart. That's what makes me think that.
Yeah, I totally see that, the whirling up and sinking, right? Like this kind of roller coaster ride of emotions, right? Um,
Before we go into all these details, can I contradict? I don't. I believe that this is the most imagistic poem by HD we have in Modpo because of the economy of language. You have a clear and precise image. It's a vivid moment.
Mark, did you say it is or is not the most
It is.
images?
It
Okay.
is the most perfect poem of imagism that we had.
I love it.
I'm not.
May I just I agree with Mark, but one thing I find terribly difficult is if anybody has split wood, you can't compare it really to a leaf.
But
I mean, I'm split wood, have a Norwegian hatchet that splits very well, but nothing looks like a leaf afterwards unless you split it so fine. But then that's getting away from imagery.
Well, no,
Where
I think the leaf is either the rain or snow hits these leaves that are in fall, and they rent like a split wood. You know, when you get your Norwegian hatchet and you go and nothing happens.
yeah,
Okay, nothing happens. But then the next time, and it just goes in half. And so the leaf is just gets broken like that. It's rent in half in
okay,
a dramatic way that would not happen to a leaf usually.
okay. Thanks.
I'm gonna have to go ahead and disagree. If it's what you may call perfect imagism, I suppose, I think it breaks imagism. And I think that the green stone at the end is an example of an imagist image. So it's what the poet has might attempt to do with nature in creating a perfect imagist image. And for the rest of the poem, I think her personality or her consciousness totally inhabits the nature in contradiction to what an imagist poem is supposed to do.
Are you saying the you is her? It's her saying, you do this, you do that.
Yes, it's her in the storm. The storm that she imposes on nature to break it in the course of depositing this green stone.
That's interesting. That's a good and persuasive meta reading, I think, of this, right? That the poem is the storm, or she's the storm itself.
The more I read of her, the more hard pressed I am to find an imagist poem.
What I got with that leaf, you know, if you've ever seen a leaf that has been engulfed like a stone that has blown in during a storm, and then it blows off the tree and the stone is still inside the leaf, I really got that. But I have to tell you guys, it's taken me 10 years to even get into Gertrude Stein, and I'm finally into Gertrude Stein this year for the first time, and HD is next year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those are two completely different, very radically different poets. But yeah, I mean, HD. I suppose she's somewhat difficult in her own way. I mean, she's less like.
I read a thing where Williams was with HD in a storm like this, and she just went wild, like some Greek spirit come down from heaven running wild in the storm. And he said that she scared him.
She was like communing with the violence of nature.
Well, she was really into the Greek and the Greek goddesses coming down into nature and inhabiting people and present nature. And she sort of inhabits the nature, like, anyway.
Well, both Gertrude Stein and HD scare me still.
Jenny, what were you saying?
I got a lot of satisfaction out of Williams being scared.
I think Jenny was trying to. Jenny, can you repeat what you said?
Yes, I can. I'm sorry. I thought Ray had finished. What I was going to say is I don't want to take sides on the imagism bit because I don't really understand it. But I love the language. I love crush and crack and
Mm.
black and crash and hurled and whirls. There's
Mm.
just something about that language where the whole sound of it is great. And never mind the label, the sound is wonderful.
That's
And I
yeah.
think it really gives a feel of a storm too. What language she uses, you get the sense you're in the midst of a storm. That idea of inhabiting a storm or anthropomorphizing a storm,
Mm.
um, just makes me feel like I'm glad I'm looking at it a sunny day and not in a.
Um, Mona, did you want to add something? Give me a chance.
I think this conversation in general of this is the most perfect images poem that she wrote, ranging from that to this is not images. There is nothing in this that is images. I think that conversation, the entire thing, and every one of us in between, to me, it tells that how great an images poem this really is because it shows us so many different images
Yeah, yeah.
in our minds. And I totally agree with Jenny too. But that argument, that discussion, just solidifies for me. This is a good images poem.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe rather than evaluating it against the tenets of the Images Manifesto, we can reconsider it in terms of the poem's ability to evoke images. You know, why
Max,
array of them.
Max, could you read it again? You read it so beautifully. Could you
Yeah,
read it
sure,
again
sure.
for us?
Storm, you crash over the trees, you crack the live branch. The branch is white, the green crushed. Each leaf is rent like split wood. You burden the trees with black drops. You swirl and crash. You have broken off a weighted leaf in the wind. It is hurled out, whirls up and sinks a green stone. I
Thank
think
you.
also this the sonic element that Jenny you just called our attention to. I mean it's absolutely a big part of the poem. It's very deliberate, and I guess there's also like there's a separate debate to be had about whether that is a disqualifying aspect of imagism, right? Like, is it? I mean, is it? Does it? And I think the thing is, like, imagism it's not really like too clear and coherent as to what exactly it's trying to achieve. Um, but I think there's, you could argue it both ways that this sort of this sonic thing that to come back around to Stein, who Stanley mentioned, that Gertrude Stein does so well. I mean, does that qualify as imagistic? Does that disqualify a poem as imagistic if it's too sonic? Does imagism have to be more about semantics? I mean, there's a lot. There's entire debates about that. Obviously, imagism is like it's an imperfect and ultimately like failed project. So, so there's always tons to like talk about and think about with these poems. Mona and then Barbara, and then I think Ray also. Yeah, let's go Mona, Ray, Barbara, because I think I saw your hand up in between, Ray. Mona.
Well, one thing I want to mention is ironic because before I ever saw this poem ever, I have a novel that I'm trying to place published somewhere, and it's about climate, partly anyway. And one of the phrases I use in my novel for the villains or whatever the bad guys is that they have storms of the mind
Mhm.
when they are uh, acting, like they shouldn't be acting, and the with the climate being so horrendous, the weather being so horrendous in this book, they have storms of the mind, and that's what makes them act out and do the bad stuff. So, but then that was before I ever saw this poem, so I find that kind of interesting.
Yeah, there's something tumultuous, right, about the storm. It's like already evocative on its own. Ray, did you wanna chime in?
I just wanted to try to clarify what I said before. So often I end up not being clear about what I mean. Now, when I said that it breaks imagism, I didn't mean to say that it wasn't imagistic. I was just trying to say that it does way more
Sure.
than imagism is accounted
Sure.
as being capable of.
I I got that sense from what you meant, that it broke it in the good way, like the way that one breaks the internet or something, right?
I love it.
Yeah, this kind of pushing something to the limits and beyond the limits in this productive
Right.
fashion, right? Yeah, rather than yeah, which I mean is a way in some ways of casting off the constraints of the imagistic
Yeah.
Barbara?
A storm is something that's in motion, and the fact that she gave the storm agency as an actor is interesting. That's why I think it made me feel like I didn't want to be in the storm, because the storm is giving a lot, has been given a lot of agency, like something that can come at you, or that something's alive, or something that's chasing you, or that's dangerous. So I think giving the storm agency is interesting.
Yeah, right. And this happens in this address, right? This like apostrophe to the storm, right? Like the personification of it, rather than just be like the storm crashes over the trees and cracks the live branches, right? This identifying it with the pronoun you. Mark?
Yes, when I heard the keyword sound effects, that was my my keyword. Yes, I love all the sound effects that Storm consists of. You have crash, this onomatopoeia, also in crack, rush, swirl, and crash. You can really hear the storm in the poem.
Totally.
And also these alliterations of burden, black, where you have these plosives, which indicates the devastating power or overwhelming power of the storm.
Yeah, I like what you say, because you have these two explosive, bird and black. Before it, the broken off, the weighted leaf, and it's not you break off, you have broken off because you had those explosives before. It's nice.
And another idea, when I read Storm, what came to my mind was another poem by Ralph Waldo Emerson, the Snowstorm, where Emerson presents the snowstorm as a creative power. The snowstorm creates something, and he describes what is created. And it's totally different here. Here you really have a snapshot. It's only one moment. It is this one moment where the storm comes.
Right. I mean, that's an interesting comparison. I mean, is there something that's being produced or generated from this storm? I mean, is it just a destructive force? I mean, it ends on this. We have the green stone, right? That's this thing that kind of the storm tosses out, right, and calls our attention to ultimately.
And the sound dissipates at the end, doesn't it? There's less sound in the end.
Right, almost as though the wind is subsiding or something, right? This gust that comes
The
through.
structure is creative.
Bar.
I mean, in Emerson's
It's
poem,
almost an
Go
ahead, Mark.
in Emerson's poem, you really have this creative power, and all these creations are described. It's different here. So it's not so much creative.
Right. It's a different, yeah, sure. Um,
I was just going to say the end, the green stone, does seem like a finale. It's over. It sinks
yes.
and then quiet. A green stone.
Right, the leaf suddenly just plummets. I mean, it's been whirled up, and then that's kind of the curtain call, right, on the storm, as well as on the poem. Matthias, you have your hand up.
Sorry, that was actually me.
Okay.
But I just wanted to kind of like expand on, I guess, like the green stone thing as well. As in like I feel like the shift between the weighted leaf and the green stone is also like really important. I kind of am still partial to the idea that this is like a complete metaphor for like someone's heart and like for a breakup, for example. And I feel like the weighted leaf, I mean, in that scenario, for example, the weighted leaf would kind of symbolize like the heart is kind of like weighted and like already kind of down. And then the green stone, because you wouldn't think of a leaf as a stone. And so then it like almost like turns heavier and like just completely dies, is kind of where my mind was going with that.
Yeah, I think the fact that the green stone can be, or the leaf as the green stone can be interpreted these in these different ways, I think is kind of what the poem wants to do. I think that the what the poem generates, if it creates something, right, is this image of the leaf whirling up and falling like a stone, becoming this green stone, this sort of transformation of a simple leaf that most people might not be paying attention to into, in fact, this much more powerful image, right? That's much more evocative, right? Than if you're just looking at a tree and you see a bunch of leaves, like out my window right now. I'm not really thinking. There's not much being terribly evoked from it, but I suppose if a storm came through and whirled one up and it flew up and then plummeted, there's a much more evocation there. There's this motion, almost this musical quality of something happening in time. Whether it's something this kind of, whether it has this sort of emotional resonance, right, of disappointment, despair, heartbreak, or something like that, in the same way that music might, when it rises and then plummets and falls, right, it might create or elicit the same kind of aesthetic response. And I think that's kind of what the poem is doing, or what its theory of imagism is, and why it's interested in this storm, this force, this destructive force of nature that actually manages to temporarily estrange something about the natural world and turn it into something evocative. Mike, did you have a hand up?
Yeah, I can't currently find the symbol for putting a hand up, which I usually can, and I can't drop images in the text, which I've been trying to do, because I created an image this morning. But I have a question as well. I'm not sure I understand the mechanism by which I'm supposed to receive the images. Is it implied that there's a direct relationship between the dictionary definition of the words and the image that will pop up in my head? Because I'm not sure I ever believed that. So when we talk about an images poem, I don't know how it works. You know, but the image I wanted to share was, oops, no, hang on, that's what I created this morning. That was the accusing finger with a emerald ring that I had in my head.
Cool. That's you can't drop that. I wish you could drop it in the chat so I could get.
I can't. I've been trying for the last half hour to various ways of copying in. It's like I seem to be missing some of the capabilities, and I'm using the same browser I've been using for other chats, so I don't quite understand. Anyway, you saw it. So yeah, I saw something very, you know, a relationship that pointing at someone who's wrecked a relationship. a home. But yeah, but the secondary question is, how does it work? How is imagism? Is there a documented description by imagists of how imagism is supposed to work? Actually, such that you receive the images that they supposedly put in the words.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I think that's a really good point, right? And that kind of brings us back to Jenny's comment regarding the musicality of it, right? Like, there's different ways in which the image is depicted and evoked, right? Martin?
Yeah, I was just thinking that imagism is a bit like a unicorn. It's a nice idea. It's a good target to have, but I don't think it's actually ever been trapped or seen. Um, it's really difficult to find a definition as well. There are people who write definitions, but a single imagist manifesto is quite tricky to define.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I wonder if imagism is really a product of Pound's advertising rather than a real movement.
Oh. Well, is it meant to be the case that a poetry is no more than the words, and therefore there's this, you put these words that might push up images, and therefore you see them? Is it that mechanical?
Yeah, I've actually got a few extracts from a document. I think it was Pound who wrote it. And it says to use the language of common speech, but to employ the exact word, not the nearly exact, nor the merely decorative word. I think that's possibly self-inconsistent. He says other things like to produce a poetry that is hard and clear, never blurred nor indefinite. I think that has quite fuzzy boundaries myself.
Yeah, exact word, that makes me
yeah, just wait till you hear the finally. He says, finally, most of us believe that concentration is of the very essence of poetry.
Right.
And that's a little bit like saying splurge is the nature of splurge, because that's what splurge does, without ever defining splurge.
It describes what, Martin?
It's like, I said, it's like defining splurge as being what splurge does.
Right.
You don't define splurge because it doesn't really exist. So I think that it's words, but it's words without pointer.
Right. There's entire theories of linguistics and semantics, right, that are sort of being invoked in the bits of Pound's manifesto that you conveyed to us. And also, I mean, this is sort of what we're just kind of circling around now here, right, with Mike's point about how the image gets conveyed. Is it symbolic? Is it visual? Is it, how does this, what is exactly taking place here? Barbara, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and this is in the same vein that it's you can't really write about an image in a neutral way, and there seems to be some sense or some idea that you can, because everyone is subjective in the way they see something, and then the words are so loaded. Every word is loaded, so that whole idea that you can produce in words an image that everyone will see the same thing, which seems somewhat of a goal, like a photograph, and even that can be ambiguous because we'll all look at it and see something different. So it seems like an impossible task to me to produce an image in words that everybody will look at and say and see the same thing. It's just kind of paradoxical and hard.
I think that the images. This is a movement from 100 years ago. I mean, it's responding to lots of things. It's provocative. I mean, this idea, all of these tenets of imagism, all of these arguments, these claims. I mean, it's modernism. It's about a provocative theory of art, right? Like it's not necessarily supposed to like make sense. You know, I think that's a good way to think of it. I mean, it's the same thing with like it's the same thing with all these other manifestos from the surrealists to the Dadaists to the futurists to all of these other people from exactly the same time all around the world. You know, like they're just trying to provoke people to have a slightly different idea of art and culture. Mona, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I don't know who said it because I'm losing track, but maybe it was you about I think it has to do with the manifesto and what is imagism and well, anyway, what I've seen through the progression is that it's really a progression. It's like a scale, and everything is a reaction to what came before. Whenever they go from one school of writing or poetry to another, to me, it seems like a reaction to the one before. When I say they, I mean the ones who made up all these arbitrary rules and schools of poetry. I see it as a spectrum more than separate things. One led to the other as a reaction for one reason or another. That's and I think uh, that can explain some of the drastic changes in my head anyway.
Ray, did you want to respond to that?
Sure. I'm just going to go ahead and say that is there some possibility that this poem might be trying to answer the question of what an image is? Okay, insofar as, I mean, I don't know if I would go as far as to say that the black drops are ink and the leaves are pages, and so, but the way that the green stone settles out of the storm into some sort of a conclusion or settling out, I think it tries to illustrate how an image forms, or what the image is that they're going for, or how an image evolves. I sort of thinking out loud there.
That makes sense. Yeah. That there's something a bit more like processual or something process oriented.
I'm wondering whether we're kind of going down an odd path here, because what little I understand of images was brought back to me by what Max said when I talked about the sound of this poem. If imagism is to work strictly, then presumably it is only trying to produce an image of the thing it describes, and not to have another story behind it, not to be a poem which can be read as a human thing or whatever, but in this case, only a description of a storm. But is that being too simplistic?
That's a really good point, right? I mean, and even if you think of imagism in the context of the popularization of photography and also film at this time, this new output of visual images. I mean, you would never say that like a picture of well, I guess sometimes it's hard to take a picture of a storm, but you would never say that a picture of a tree in a storm is just meant to document a tree in a storm, right? Like there's a billion different ways, there's infinite ways that you can take that picture. There's infinite ways you can generate that image. And in each there's choices that are being made that tell that sort of second story, right? It's impossible not to, right? This kind of other story that you mentioned, Jenny, right? Like it's not right. Like the way that you decided when writing this poem, she's not just I don't yeah, I agree. I don't think the project is meant to just try to write a poem that somehow is like a one-to-one representation of a storm, right? Because that's I think that's sometimes how the Imagist manifesto is understood, or Imagism more generally, but it's never how it works because it's not possible for it to work that way. Mona, do you have something you want to add?
You said exactly what I was going to say. It's not possible, even if that is what they meant. Even if
Yeah.
that is 100% what they meant, that is 100% impossible because I read it the way my mind sees it. My mind conjures up images, and so does yours, and they are probably different.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah, for sure. And I think everybody has that understanding, right? Like and so I think that the Imagism is really trying it's it's trying to get at something else, as we've already started to say, as I mean as Ray is talking about, right? Like it's not really trying to theorize a poetics of one-to-one um representation of a thing, right? Like it's much more meant as a provocation around, I would say, around symbolism more than anything, right? Like it's supposed to undo and unwind cliches and cliched symbols and symbols, right? Like this is really what it's about. And it's coming out at this time where it's like, this is also what we talk about, like in terms of like the William Carlos Williams and his polemic about the rose, right? Like there's always these it's really a poetics of rethinking the kinds of images and associations that we generate, right? And actually bringing extra care to it. Stanley and then Mark.
Huh. Okay. People threw Ezra Pound around here, and I went looking for my book Ezra Pound, but I only found the ABCs of reading. And I opened to this perfect spot to reinforce what Mark had to say earlier. There is language that is made to be spoken, perhaps even to be ranted. Now, this is a poem that you need to read in the middle of a storm, to really get it. And you need to read it about 10 times to really get it. That's the way I feel. But Shakespeare was, well, the chapter I opened was on Shakespeare, and that Shakespeare really wanted to be a poet, but he couldn't make it as a poet, so he turned to be a playwright. That's what some people say. But this poem, I think the second time that you read it, Max, I really got it a lot more. And I think if I read it, well, now I just read The Snowstorm, and I get it. Anyway, language is meant to be spoken. That's what Ezra Pound wants to add today. And I'm out.
Yeah, I think no. I think that's spot on. That there is absolutely. I mean, we've also been circling around this point a bit, right? There's absolutely this sonic, prosodic element at play here, where you're supposed to hear this. You're supposed to be paying attention to the alliteration. I mean, this is all part of what this poetics is about. Above and beyond the visual, or this sort of visual aspect of images or imagery, right? Mark, you have your hand up as well.
Yes, I'm still comparing Emerson and HD. Whereas Emerson admires the achievements by the snowstorm, in HD poems, there's no emotional response to what the speaker observes.
Sure, yeah.
So no second story.
Well, there's no.
Yes, I mean,
Memorializing by
what
the
you could
speaker.
have is the description of the storm, and then also the reactions, the response by the speaker, and this second thread that's missing in the poem.
Right, which I think is this is a big aspect of
Imagism.
Yeah, absolutely. This kind of like, we're not going to tell you what to think or something like that, right? Like explicit, right? Like this is that's a big aspect of it. But it winds up having, as many people have been responding throughout. I mean, as Mona said from the beginning, as Tatiana echoed in the course of the discussion, I mean, there seems to be this emotional arc in here too, right? That seems in some ways, maybe it's deliberate, maybe it is this inevitable supplementary meaning that the assemblage of images just cannot help but generate, right? In the same way that if you sit down at the piano and you just hit a couple of keys at random, it's going to produce an effect, right? It's going to sound a certain way, either jarring or strange or beautiful, depending on what you do. That there is this evocative element that's almost unavoidable. Stanley, did you have your hand up a moment ago?
I was just going to add that on Wednesday's discussion group, Al got into this whole thing about how, I think it was this week, that every time we read these poems, you get something else out of it. And to read them out loud is so rich. And that's my final word for this Modpo session is it was really rich, really rich. And it was the sound that brought it out.
Yeah. I think I mean, when we can actually like dial into those other aspects of it, then we do uncover this additional richness that is maybe not always evident when you first read something like this, like HD Storm. That there is this musicality, this sonic element that's coming through from the repetition and the alliteration and the choice of words. And I think it when we're paying attention to all of these aspects, like we can't help but have this emergent um, emotional narrative to it, right? Like it's
I think it was in your office hour on Tuesday when we were talking about repetition and repetition and repetition, and how each time that a translator translates somebody else's work or whatever, it puts another richness into it. And
totally. Yeah, that's right. We were talking about translation.
Yeah, and I've been a linguist and translator all my life, and I could take a sentence and redo it 50 million times, but like my teacher once said, you got to end it somewhere.
Mona, you have your hand raised.
I'm not a linguist or a translator, but what I have learned by listening to others speak is that you can translate poetry, especially, I think, maybe, I don't know. You can translate poetry by either translating the words exactly or translating the meaning of the words. And that also contributes to the many different types of translations that we might find anywhere. Stanley, I think, can you correct me or confirm?
Well, I know that yes, you can take a word, especially now with Google Translate. I mean, my God, you can hit Google Translate and have the snowstorm translated into Ukrainian,
Yeah,
there you have it. And it's pretty good Ukrainian. Anyway, so but you can also read it from the heart or you can read it from the head.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Oh, you have to go, Jeroen. Ciao. Take care. Take care. Should we go? Barbara, I see you have your hand raised. We can take a couple minutes to gather a couple concluding thoughts on this poem before we switch gears to Barbara Guest's The Past. Barbara?
I was just going to go back to what you were talking about when you mentioned symbolism and sort of breaking up old symbols and giving them or using new symbols in different ways. I would have never caught it. Mona started the conversation about the leaf being a symbol for the heart and a green stone being a symbol for the heart. Certainly breaking up that I would have never compared the heart to the leaf. And so that sort of goes with your point that part of their goal was to really shake up language and create different different words. So I thought that was an interesting point, and it really for me takes a group because I would have never seen that. So I appreciate all of you and your many different ideas, and other things came to me too, but that's just one I'll give an example of. So thank you.
No, thanks, Barbara. Mark?
Yes, symbolism is a great point. I was struck by tree. What's meant by tree? Is it maybe the family tree? Is it the tree of knowledge that is struck here by the storm? I think there's a lot of symbolism in the poem.
Yeah, no, for sure. There is, I think there's a play. Yeah, there's an intentional play on symbolism or intervention into symbolism or something like that. I think that's a big part to continue to come back to this theme of what imagism is. I think it's a big part of it. It's just like this, I think a way to think of it is not necessarily.
Sorry.
Oh, so Terry, were you about to say something? Or was that somebody else?
Well, I wanted to ask when. No, it was me, and I just wondered when this was written.
Good question. I assume
I have it. I have the collection of the collected poems. That was published in Sea Garden in 1916.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
That's early, and
so that's not middle age. It is
like you were saying,
really her first poems.
Yeah. Wow. And so still that, kind of symbolism, this classicism that we're going to see more of her later. It's interesting that you're noting this. I mean, just in talking about the symbolism, that it is, trying to be imagist and without total reference, but it's still there. And we know she's going to come back to this later. Now we know.
Mona and Ray are saying leaves are pages. Yeah, I can see that too. Yeah.
Black drops are ink.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, totally. You burden the trees with black drops, like right. We're back to the creative storm, right? The storm of the poem, the storm of poetry, running its course, like driving her to write, to create. Mona, go ahead.
Or the black dots are tears or blood, and the leaves and are pages of their story, and it could be any of that because I see
Same thing.
the images, the symbolism of all that.
Or even the family tree, the relations between members of a family.
Sorry, hold on. Matthias, you or Tatiana?
This time,
yeah. Okay.
I found the contrast between black and white quite interesting. In the beginning of the poem, it's you crack the live branch, the branch is white, so it dies. This is how I interpret this. And then later, you get the black drops, kind of as
a contrast.
Yeah, it's kind of a contrast. And I go with that interpretation that the black drops could be either tears or some sort of aftermath of the storm, like a polluted nature afterwards.
Yeah, I like. Yeah, we didn't talk too much about the contrast. I mean, I guess this is one of the ways to go back to Mike's concern about how the image is meant to be conveyed, constructed, received. Right, there is, in addition to repetition, there is and uh, prosody in these and this alliterations play on sound. There is, in fact, this kind of working through of contrasts and this juxtaposition and reconciliation of opposing terms. I mean, even the I mean, from the white branch to the black drops, right? But also of the leaf becoming a stone, right? Like this bringing together of these different kinds of images and sort of synthesizing them. Is I think a big part of the work that this poem is trying to do or wants to do.
She's pretty wild.
HD.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, no, she's pretty cool. And she does, as Terry was saying, I mean, she will get into and much more into this like classical thing. Classicist thing.
Classicist.
Yeah, it's not classist. That's a different thing.
Classicist, classical Greek and myth and things like that.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what Mark thinks about this. Do you think there's difference between the two stanzas? It seems to be a change to me, and it's more images in the first stanza to me, because the black drops are a little bit less obvious. I guess you could say raindrops can appear black. That's pushing the metaphor.
It is pushing the metaphor, and it's absolutely. I think that's a good way to put it. Pushing the metaphor. You're totally right. Also, burden is a more freighted word. Burden. We typically think of burdening as having a negative connotation.
Yeah,
people are almost never burdened in a good way.
I like to wear a heavy pack, so I get in better shape.
The you begins to disappear in the second stanza.
The you, you have broken off a weighted leaf in the wind, and then right there the attention shifts to the leaf, right? Like
there's no more you
passing.
Yeah.
And then it is hurled out, whirls up and sinks a green stone.
I wouldn't really call that a sonnet, but if you count the lines, including the title, you have 14 lines, and you have the sestet, then comes the volta, and then you have the second stanza, which is the octave. So there is a turn.
Yeah, I think you're totally right that there's a turn. Yeah, and I think it's very fitting with the storm, right? I mean, the storm is a thing that arrives and passes, right? Like there is this turn in the event of a storm, right?
And there's a conclusion.
The conclusion.
Sound structure.
Shall we shift gears to the Barbara Guest poem so we can have ample time to discuss that as well? Because we've done a little less than an hour on this one, and we'll do a little less than an hour on the Barbara Guest. I'm gonna go ahead and send it through the chat now. You should all have received it. I'll go ahead and read it, and we'll talk about it as per usual. So this is The Past by Barbara Guest. The form of the poem subsided. It enters another poem. A witness was found for the markings inscribed upside down. It might have been a celebration, so strong the presence of the poem. The sky sinks slowly inside the past. I'm going to read it again. The form of the poem subsided. It enters another poem. A witness was found for the markings inscribed upside down. It might have been a celebration, so strong the presence of the poem. The sky sinks slowly inside the past.
Oh, Max, you forgot to read the title. I think it's important because the past frames the poem. It starts with the
Yes,
past
yes,
and it
yes, the
also ends
past.
with
Yeah,
the past.
totally.
Why don't you read it, Mark? Why don't you read it?
Why? No, we had it twice.
No,
think
one more
that's
time, please.
Yeah.
Please, Mom. One more time.
Oh, it wouldn't really change that.
Oh,
It
God.
would. Now I want to hear it again. I just want to hear it again.
The past.
You could read it, Terry.
No, I want to hear Mark. I love
Mark's
his
got it.
voice.
Okay.
The past. The form of the poem subsided. It enters another poem. A witness was found for the markings inscribed upside down. It might have been a celebration, so strong the presence of the poem. The sky sinks slowly inside the past. Usually, when I read out poems, I comment on the reading. It was a bit difficult because of the enjambments.
Yeah.
And so strong the presence. You can end here, and you can also add of the poem.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, really, thank
Stanley,
you.
we can't hear you.
Also, every time that a poem is read for me, especially, like with the Modpo, every time we read something, it brings about different images, brings about different sounds. And Mark, both you and Max read it differently. I think I really want to get into performance poetry. I'm play it with my harmonium and just read poems. I could be happy the rest of my life doing that. Thank you, Mark.
Yes, but is it really a poem?
Yes.
A poem is more like a narrative. It's more like short fiction.
Yeah, but if you think it's a poem, it is.
It is, right. I mean, it's a poem of the New York School, and they're playing with that, with having a narrative and at the same time the poem, or anti-narrative in this case.
Right.
But because it sounds like a narrative, but the sentences do not really fit together. It's fragmented.
I've made several narratives already, because writing the essay, I made a narrative about writing a poem for a celebration. This time, as you read it, I thought about a poem that's written on a piece of paper and then forgotten. And then on that same paper, a poem was written on the other side.
Mm.
So it's a little bit of a palimpsest.
Yeah.
You see both. And the markings were inscribed upside down. All of a sudden, you're realizing you've had these same thoughts about, then they come together because they just happen to be on the same paper. And it's just that's really the metaphor, because these same thoughts come together in our minds one day, and then the same thought comes in a different way the next day. So I like the picture I made, but
I like it. I like it too. It's making me think of something in particular, but I'm gonna let Mona and Mike. So first Mona and then Mike respond. And then we could talk a little bit more about what it is exactly this poem is trying to describe.
Well, I see this poem, the way it's written, as a cross between a lineated and a prose poem. So in a way, I don't know if this exists, but in a way, it's a lineated prose poem. Very short, but that's how I kind of see it. And when I first read this, right after the other one, I almost felt like it's the second chapter. It is what you guys said was missing after the green stone, or after the stone was, fell in the other one. This is almost like the next chapter to me. It could continue. So the way Terry described, and I can't pronounce that word, but I've seen it written. The way you described that, one poem written on this side and another one on the other side, and I could see that with these two poems in my head.
Two poems.
Yeah, the other one, the HD one, and this one.
Yeah, yeah, the palimpsest. Isn't that how you say it? Palimpsest?
Okay, yeah. I've seen that. I just kind of forgot the word.
Mike?
I was looking at what the sky was about, and given that we have the past as a topic, and then you look up and you're looking at the future or heaven. You're looking towards something aspirationally, typically, and therefore, when the sky sinks into the past, it's kind of a loss of hope. And the poem subsides as well.
Yeah.
I don't, yeah, see, I try not to put things on like the loss of hope, that this kind of symbolism, that this, yeah, I mean, I think as a modernist, the idea is not to take some of these old classical associations. So you don't have to, just because of that's been used in the past, and we all recognize that symbolism, we don't have to take it. I kind of always read modernism like that. So I don't really want to know who the Greek god is. I don't want to know who Beelzebub was or any of the religious people. I just want to take it as I want to leave the sky as the sky, and that it sinks slowly inside the past can be something totally not symbolic, except that it turns to the next day. As the sky, as we see it sink, it's sunset.
Right. That was also my idea. That when the sky sinks slowly inside the past, it's the end of the day. The work is done, and the question is, which work? Form is important. The past frames the poem. Frames are important for poems. It gives them form, and she also talks about the form of the poem subsided. The form of the poem. Forms of poetry change. They enter another poem. She writes about rewriting in poetry, rewriting in literature, in general. A witness was found for the markings inscribed upside down. These are the annotations. It sounds like the work of a detective. The reader becomes the detective. He tries to figure out the meaning of the poem. And maybe the speaker here reads a poem that was already annotated by someone else and then maybe turned into another poem.
Martin?
And the past, also for memory, that we write about our memories.
Right, and once the poem is done, it's the past.
Which is part of this like palimpsest thing that you talked about, Terry. Which I think is a very good way of understanding what this poem's about or what it's trying to like to relay or describe. I think Martin, you had your hand up, is that right?
Yeah, I'm having real problems with that last line actually, because it's giving me a problem for tenses. because it clearly says the sky sinks, which I presume is a present tense, but it's inside the past.
Mm.
And so it's actually within the past. Now, that could be a clever pun with title and final words, but if it's just to exploit a pun, that's a pretty shoddy poem.
The trouble I'm having is with that preposition inside. If it just the sky sinks slowly toward the past, it would be more normal. But inside the past, it makes it something that we have to stop and think about more.
Right.
And is that giving you trouble, Martin, or are you finding an explanation for that, or?
That's what's giving me the trouble. I'm having difficulty with it's like a temporal dissonance. It's a
Yes,
present
but
past.
yes, but isn't it the writing, the poem, literature that keeps our memories, that keeps the past. So the past is inside poetry, is inside literature, inside our writings.
I want to give Mike a chance to respond because I see you've had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going back to the beginning of it, and thinking it has a kind of Alice in Wonderland like quality, that it sort of subsides and enters another poem, and then you're in a world where markings are upside down.
Yeah.
And you know, you really at that point want someone else to see it, but you find a witness just to confirm that's what you're seeing.
Yeah, I like that Alice in Wonderland component. I mean, Terry, when you first mentioned the palimpsest, or this ghost writing coming through, I think there's a lot of that. I think there's also this poem, what it's trying to describe, the shape, the topology, is also for me it's like a Mobius strip too. Like I imagine the poem twisting on itself, becoming upside down and entering another poem in the course of doing that, right? Like and there's something almost like infinite about it, right? I mean, with the framing of the past on either side, as Mark called our attention to, there's the past at the beginning, the past at the end. It kind of folds back into itself. It sinks slowly inside itself. It subsides into itself. There's that kind of interesting, to go back to the Lewis Carroll bit, like this topsy-turvy element a little bit to what's being described.
And I sort of then see it might have been a celebration that Alice coming across an empty tea party without any of the participants.
Oh yeah, the celebrations was I see Mark and then Mona and then Ray. So Mark, go ahead.
I'm still wondering about the enjambment, so strong the presence. Why doesn't the editor continue the sentence in that line? Why do we have the line break? Maybe the genitive of the poem refers to the sky. The sky of the poem sinks slowly inside the past, inside another poem. What I also find interesting is this upside down. You turn something upside down to figure out what something in particular is. But upside down, this is also what the reader does, the witness, as that person is called in the poem. You start on top and then you go down with your annotations.
Mona?
I absolutely love your analogy of the Mobius strip. That is so awesome. So I picked up on a my mind went a couple of places, I should say that. The witness could could that be the reader? And going further on what I said about how we all read things differently, it's just an upside down or mixed up or whatever. And honestly, sometimes I'll read a poem from bottom up to kind of get more understanding of it. So the witness could be the reader. I was also wondering, this is a reference to the past. And there's a celebration. It might be a celebration. Who was it that wrote the poem about he's supposed to be working on something, but he's staring out the window? Huh?
John Ashbery's The Instruction Manual.
That one. Yeah, that invoked that whole scenario for me. And that was in the past for Barbara, because I think, anyway, I don't know when John Ashbery wrote that, but was it written before this? Because that invoked that celebration to me.
I believe the Ashbery predates this, but I'm not 100% sure.
That's what I thought.
It's too.
So yeah, I saw that so vividly.
Yeah. I think Ray, did you have a comment? Were you going to jump in earlier?
Sure. Barbara Guest wrote something in a book called, what's the book? Can't quite remember what the name of the book is, that helped me understand what was going on at the end, which what I was feeling but couldn't quite put my finger on, with the enjambment and that miraculous last line. And she says here, Guest declared, illumination is the most beautiful experience literature can present us with, when a reader is converted to the poem and invisible magic passes between poet and reader. So I think that enjambment is setting up an illumination in the last line. And that's what the celebration, the presence, and the witness is leading to, in a sense. And so it starts with the past in the title and ends with the past, the last two lines in the poem. And so that line, guide thinks slowly inside the past with all the sibilant S's, is sort of like an illumination or a spell. That's what it feels like to me.
I like the reading of the sibilants here. Stanley's asking if you can read the illumination line again.
Oh, the illumination line. Okay, what's the book? Okay, the book it's a prose book called Forces of Imagination, which I have on hold at the library. And Guest declared, illumination is the most beautiful experience literature can present us with, when a reader is converted to the poem and visible magic passes between poet and reader.
That idea of the conversion to the poem is very interesting. It may be relevant here too, right? Like the conversion to the poem.
Yes.
And it's also, I mean, again, it's part of this, like, there is this, right? We were all talking about this kind of interchange. This poem is trying to be is about some kind of, seems to be about a conversion, right? It's about this moment of interchange between two different terms or two different parties, right? Like the poem enters the other poem, right? Like this moment that she's trying to get at. It seems like, I mean, I think this is very useful context that you bring in, right? Because it seems very much to illuminate, so to speak, what this poem is about or driving at it, because it's I mean, we don't even have to say that it's obviously a meta poem, right? So it's a poem about poetry. It's an ars poetica. It's about what poetry is, what she imagines it to be. It's a bit more postmodern than some of the other examples we have, and it does seem to be sort of turning around that idea of um, conversion, this idea of illumination and conversion happening simultaneously. I see Barbara has her hand up, and then Mike. Barbara, go ahead.
I think it's interesting that it says so strong the present, and then there's a break. So the present moment is between the past and the future. And we talk about being in the present moment. So then it goes on to say of the poem. So I just think that's interesting in terms of what we've just been talking about, and that point of illumination often is found in the present moment. And it is a play with time, I think, in a way. Obviously, it's called the past. So that break was interesting to me to highlight so strong the presence or the present.
I think it really does something surreal with time to create sort of a liminal space where the past is intermixed with the present, or helps to form the present in the way, you could pick a word, and a word only means something because it was used before in the past. So,
Yeah.
The past interpenetrates with the present, and even as you speak, like Stanley was getting at before, speaking is magical, and it's really interpenetrated by the past, the distant past. Okay. And I think that's the illumination here that I feel in this poem. I really love what she does with the time. When I see upside down, I think of an hourglass. It's never really
right
up.
Which is also this I want to come around to the question of time. I'm going to let Mike comment in 1 second, but what you're saying about the hourglass also makes me think a little bit of the Mobius strip, which is sort of I think I personally think is a big part of the topology of this poem, the shape it's trying to grasp and evoke. Mike?
I guess following a bit from the Mobius strip and the hourglass, I used to be a programmer back in the 80s in machine code, quite a lot of it. And there's this, I put it in the chat, there's this technique of where you can re-enter a piece of code. So just by recalling it, you just call back to the point of the beginning and it runs again. And sometimes you're passing variables and sometimes you're not, you're just changing something else. But this eternal return of the past relaunches the poem, the past.
Yeah, right.
It's a call to that procedure.
I like that this idea of the procedure too here. I think in terms of, I think that's also gives us a way to think a little bit about also this idea of converting the reader as almost this procedural thing. Mark, you have your hand up as well.
Yes, the past is really temporal. You're all referring to the time aspect of past. To me, the past is more tradition, literary tradition.
Sure, yeah, that too.
Barbara Guest writes in literary tradition. The past is also memory. That is the content of poems, of literature in general.
I think you're totally right. We've been talking a bit about the. Oh wait, Mary, you have to go. Bye, Mary.
Bye.
Take care. Right. There's other. I mean, the past evokes a lot of things, right? Like there's 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 one's personal past, and there's the past, the sort of the burden of the past or something like that, right? Or the influence of the past, and this the sort of a tradition, right, that one finds themselves in and can't help but work within. Um, right, there's a literary past that's being invoked too, right? And there's also, I mean, to come to these to this question of time, a little bit more concretely, a little bit more granularly. I mean, there's also the past tense, right? I wanted to talk a little bit about the way that time works at the level of the line here, just in terms of the different the times, the tenses that are deployed, and how they're kind of coming together, or working with each other or against each other. I mean, the form of the poem subsided is pretty straightforward past tense. It enters. We have now a present tense, another poem. A witness was found. This is past, but in a passive voice, right? A witness was found for the markings. It might have been, right? There's this conditional, there's this hypothetical, I don't know if you can hear my cat screaming in the background. Sorry, this is throwing me off. It might have been, right, is such, any grammar people here can tell us what it might have been is as a temporal structure in language? It might have been. I actually don't. I mean, I don't know what the exact linguistic grammatical term is for it.
We call that conditional.
Conditional and past, so have been, but that's also like twere in the past.
Yes, it's a conditional, right? It is a conditional past, right?
And it's past, and
yeah, but it's
I don't,
much more. Yeah, I don't know. Go ahead, Ray.
I don't know what it's called strictly grammatically, but I think it's just a wonderful show of how she is using tense to create this liminal atmosphere.
Totally.
Okay. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, that liminal atmosphere that you described, I think is spot on, right? In a way that there is this progressive move towards this somewhat less determinate time in the poem, right? From this thing happened in the past to this thing was done to somebody in the past to this thing might have been so in the past, right? Like there is this kind of moving out, winding out. Mona, you have your hand up. Go ahead. Mona,
I have it up. I have it up twice because I wanted to tell you. I knew this was past perfect, but I could not explain it until I looked it up. Past perfect is used to indicate that a past action or state happened before another past action. That's number one.
Yes.
Number two, it's used when stating information that was said or reported by someone. And number three, it's used to express conditional statements. So the had found is a past perfect. And I can't remember the other one in there, but there's another one. No, that may be the only one. I'm not sure about it might have been. That could be a past perfect. I'm not as sure about that one, but it's something like that. But if it fits kind of number three, used to express conditional statements. So I think it is a past perfect also.
I don't really think she needed to be thinking about any of that though when she was writing this.
No. I just said that because the question was brought up. What kind of grammar is this? Max asked that question.
Yeah, no,
And I knew it was past perfect, but it is so hard to describe that instead of fumbling around with my words, I looked it up.
Thank you. The right, yeah, no, you're right. The perfect tense being the plusquamperfekt, as it's called in German, which I don't actually remember what's called. The more than perfect, right? Like this way. I mean, what's super interesting about it might have been is that you have this past. It's not just it was, and it's not like it had been, which is
Right.
already because you already have this difference between it was, right, in your sort of simple past tense, and it had been in your sort of plusquamperfect tense of something something was right, like however I don't even know, it's almost too, we all use these expressions all the time without even thinking about them, and the minute you try to describe them it's truly the most mind-boggling thing.
That is why I had to look it up.
Yeah, no, I really
But it's
That's my point.
it's conditional.
it's
It's a match.
conditional, yes. On top of that, it's conditional in that it's like in the past the condition might have been such that something would have been such in a previous past.
Yes, conditional true. Conditional true.
Yeah, it's
I think it's really great that Mona knew where to look it up.
yeah, actually, I'm
Well,
impressed.
no, I knew
Yeah.
that it was past perfect, but I had to Google it instead of knowing where to look it up. I was like, okay, how am I going to define past perfect without mumbling and fumbling with my words for a half hour?
um
Well, here's something interesting, that it might have been a celebration is conditional, but everything else, as fantastical as it seems, is stated as fact. The form of the poem subsided and entered another poem. Now, the thing that could have, that, you could easily know if it's a celebration or not, is the one that's in this nebulous tense.
Can you repeat that, please?
Sorry, it might have been a celebration. We can know if it was a celebration or not. That brings it into question. If we
It
should
is
know.
conditional. It is conditional.
It's conditional, which means it's not for certain.
yes.
This is something we could easily know. The previous two lines were stated in non-conditional, in concrete tenses. The form of the poem subsided. It enters another poem. That's pretty fantastical shit. That's science fiction, really. But she states it as factual,
right,
and the witness was found for the markings inscribed upside down. Well, that's pretty fantastical too. And, okay, all right, we're believing you. And then she's not sure. Okay, you've taken us down this road, and what? Now we've got to consider, she's making us consider what celebration means. That was it a good thing that these two poems collided, that they saw each other, that these thoughts mashed together? Because we're now getting it into the conditional. She's saying, make this a poem for me. I told you these factual things, now make it a poem. So strong, the presence. Here, poet comes back in really hard, and like you said, Mark, makes a stop there, and da 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 da, brain going, can't get to sleep, of the poem that sinks slowly inside the past.
If I were editing this poem for someone else, I would say remove of the poem. It is not needed.
So strong the presence, you mean?
No, I would say remove.
Sorry, you would have full stopped it there. So it might have been a celebration comment, so strong the presence.
Yes, and remove of the poem. It isn't needed.
I just want to go.
Yes, and it adds of the poem to the sky of the poem.
I want to go back to Mike's comment about his programming and putting the program back in the 80s and having it rerun. And I think this is a perfect thing for a programmer to do in the 80s, Mike.
Yes, it was. It was the thing I did.
And put it all upside down.
Yeah. Yeah. When
I read the poem more as a meta poem about the history of poetry. That poetry is a form of of rewriting. That you rewrite a former poem, and if you go back into the past and follow that tradition, you come to the celebration of who was there? War heroes, um, kings, monarchs, and they were celebrated. And to memorize them, at that time, people couldn't write. They had to remember these stories, and you put these stories into ballads, into poetry, to memorize the past.
Mm. Yeah, so this is this sort of like almost T.S. Eliot kind of idea of tradition as this sort of living thing that people are kind of always working within and against, right? In this style.
And he even quotes former works.
Yeah.
The Wasteland, for example.
Martin, did you want to add some?
Yeah, I was just going to link this then to Armand Trout's anti-short story. If we're thinking of this in a sort of poetic tradition, the sky sinks slowly inside the past. I mean, anti-short story says a girl is running. Don't tell me she's running for her bus. So there's an interesting traditional tension there.
Can you say that again with respect to the anti-short story? Like in that way you see that playing out here as well?
Yeah, the anti-short story tells us a girl is running.
Yeah.
Don't tell me she's running for her bus.
Right.
And then all that aside, I mean, it's the fact that Guest does tell us the sky sinks slowly inside the past. There's a nice sort of feel of tradition and the tension between two poets there.
Right.
I'm also thinking about the Stein as well, with the journey, where you get a narrative that slowly decays.
Yeah, no, yeah, there's definitely a lot like I mean, yeah, there's definitely a lot of ways to understand this with respect to a kind of larger poetic tradition and the intervention it wants to make or the way that it's kind of dealing with that. It's a little bit different, of course. Yeah, I mean, as you're saying, a little bit different from the Armentrout and the anti-short story, which is like this kind of like don't, you know, like this whole tradition of narrative, like let's search up story, let's like toss that out, right? It's a little bit different in terms of the way that it's thinking of like poetry sort of sinking in, becoming part of the past, rising out of the past. Mark, did you want to do something?
Yes. To me, the expression sky is also a rejection of poetic diction. Usually, poets write about heaven, not sky, and she transforms the poem into a narrative. She gives poetic thinking a different form, the form of the New York School, namely in the form of a narrative in which you also use um, common language and not poetic diction.
It's interesting to me that it does say the sky sinks slowly inside the past, and I'm so used to thinking of the sun setting, and she wrote the sky sinks, and so that's that because my mind just automatically translated that. So it's another playing with kind of metaphors that we usually use, and shifting them a bit. At least that happened for me.
Yeah, right. And so in that respect,
Yes, I also understood that as the sun, And I have to agree that our guest is completely right. It's not only the sun that sings, it's the whole sky. Everything gets black and dark.
Right. I mean, thanks for Barbara for starting to link it up a little bit to the HD in this comparison to the way that the two of them are rewiring a little bit, using poetry to rewire our images, our associations. I think that's a great bridge back to that other poem. Ray, or did you want to say something?
It strikes me that the last few comments are getting at the upside downness of this thing.
Yeah.
That upside down line, I can think of like half a dozen ways that upside down comes into this. It's quite an amazing thing. The upside down, kind of unexpected. It turns a lot of expectations upside down, and it even relates to this might have been, you know. When you say might have been, you're not necessarily saying that you doubt something. You could be saying, inferring that something is unexpected, that actually happened. You know, it might have been something other than what you thought it was and what you were expecting. I mean, when that's part of the surreal nature of this, and I remember one of the things that critics of surrealism would say was, if it's a surrealist picture, they would say, well, you can't tell if it's upside down or right side up.
Right. That's great. And I think that's so relevant here into the sort of surrealism of this poem in particular, right? You don't know if it's upside down.
When you think of the ocular process, things are projected upside down when you look at something in the mechanism of your seeing, you know, in the way that seeing works. Okay. And when you turn things upside down, you're doing a thorough search, making a complete mess of things.
Yes.
In order to discover something.
Right.
Okay. I think it's a terrific way to bring an unexpected phrase in like that to sort of help understand their choice of words through the whole thing.
I think, I really like that. I think that it kind of this like the ocular effect as you're talking about. I mean, I think that helps us understand too the emergence, the sudden appearance of the witness, right? Like this idea of witnessing something here, witnessing.
Yeah.
Which I mean, it goes back then to conversion too, right? It goes back to an illumination. This almost like religious, this almost like theological idea of or spiritual idea of poetry, right? The conversion, the illumination, the witness, like all of these figures who are all of these moments or figures who are involved in some kind of new sight that changes something, right? Changes the way that we understand something. Even
Right. Or as I said before, it's the reader who has to put the poem upside down to understand, to make meaning of that. It's also the poet who has to put other poems upside down to get to similar ideas and rewrite the poem.
Yeah. No, totally right. This way of it's it's a process thing as well, right? Not just the sort of reading thing. Martin, you have your hand up, and then Barbara has her hand up.
Yeah, I just have a device which I'll show you in a mo. But the idea of the sky moving, I mean, for someone with my culture, I come from a scientific astronomical background.
Right.
I tend to think of the sky rotating. So the idea that the sky does go upside down is a not entirely unfamiliar thought, although of course it's us. But the idea of trying to translate that into something which you can actually project onto a sheet. I actually have this thing, and I don't know if people have seen these before, but they're planispheres. And what you can do is you can rotate the window in them or the
That's
sky.
cool. Yeah.
It shows you what's visible.
Yeah.
And where this has a context in this is that at the moment, this side is the opposite to the side you can't see, which is this side. So you actually have an upside down, which is represented here, essentially a three-dimensional structure put into a two-dimensional disk.
Yeah. Could you
Wow.
put that above your heads and explain again, Martin? Put that above your head and tell us how to read the stars. Sorry.
Okay, so this has a window which shows
Is it-
you the horizon that you can see at the moment.
Yeah.
What you can do is rotate.
Yeah.
So the sky map starts to reveal what you can't see.
Yeah, that's so cool.
And this is a two-dimensional projection of something which is
But
happening
is it,
in three dimensions, because you actually have
yeah.
a globe that's rotating around you.
Right. But is it, and for us to see it, it's this, right?
Yeah, you hold
This
it
is
up to
how
the
we
sky.
actually see things. Yeah. Okay.
The interesting
Yeah.
thing about
And
this one, well, is that this is actually a southern hemisphere planisphere. So what I'm looking at on this is actually the sky that I'm seeing down there.
Down under.
Yeah, so the Earth is actually obstructing my view.
oh, that's
You
great.
can't even, oh geez, yeah. That's I love this idea of the two-dimensional representation of something in three dimensions, because I think it's again part of the puzzle of this poem. Barbara, I want to give you a chance to weigh in because you had your hand up, and then we'll start maybe synthesizing a few thoughts here on this poem.
Well, I think what Martin's saying is really fascinating. But what I noticed was with words, where when they're right side up, we're so sure that we understand them. But if we turn them upside down, we think they're gibberish, and it sort of plays with yeah too. I can't remember markings inscribed upside down. I thought of words inscribed upside down, and we think we're so sure we know what they mean right side up, but I think she's saying sometimes when you turn things upside down, you understand them in new ways.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's yeah, it's a bit of what Ray was saying a moment ago too, right? Like this estranging process that just happens from turning something upside down, especially with respect to language and text.
And it just happens over, as Ray was saying, it happens in so many places. Once Ray brought that up, it just it stands out. So thanks, Ray, for playing with it in that way.
I to I think this the to come back to this, the planisphere and the two-dimensional representation of the three-dimensional space. I mean, I think that's also like, just to come back to the Mobius strip, that's also what a Mobius strip is. A Mobius strip is a three-dimensional object that's actually only has one edge, right? Which is, I mean, I know that's a bit of a, I know that's a bit of a provocative and not entirely true way, geometrical way or topological way of describing what a Mobius strip is, but it's how it's often understood, right? To be, at least popularly, as being a three-dimensional object that's actually really just in two dimensions, because it just has the one single edge, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you just, if you put your finger on any side of it, it just goes infinitely. And you realize that there's only one edge, right? You can't actually grasp two different sides of it. It's again, I think that's so much of, thanks everyone for your obvious strips. I think that's such a big part of the philosophical exercise, the thought experiment of this too, right? Is grasping grasping things in different dimensions, maybe. Be it the past, be it a poem, what it means to kind of like turn something on itself, right? This upside down, what it means to kind of take something we're familiar with and invert it, bring its opposite ends together, make it upside down, see it differently in that way, represent represent something in different dimensional terms, right, than what we're used to. Mona, go ahead.
What Barbara said about the words upside down reminded me of things I've seen online. If you can read this, you have an IQ of whatever. So they'll mix up words, mix up letters and words, or they'll leave out letters and words, and our mind fills in these blanks. So what you said, Barbara, about that letters being upside down or words being upside down, that's kind of the same thing. And so I can look at this poem in that way too, just to continue the Mobius strip thing. If you had a Mobius strip and you wrote words on it, wrote a sentence with leaving out words or mixing up the words, that would make it even more difficult to read because it's on a Mobius strip. But anyway, yeah, that's kind of what I thought of.
Thanks.
I thought the Mobius strip was an act in Vegas or something. I'd never heard of it. Never heard of it.
Oh, does anyone know John Barth, Lost in the Funhouse?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
There's the first chapter. I have this here. You have to cut a strip out of the book, and then you have to glue it together, and then you have. Oh, where does it start? Here it's Oops.
Yeah, where does it start? The question.
Once upon a time, there was a story.
It's hard to do.
Once upon a time, there was a story that began, and then the strip starts again. Once upon a time, there was a story that began, etc. And this is a wonderful example of rewriting old stories. I love the book. John Barth, Lost in the Funhouse, first chapter. And the second chapter, that is Allen Ginsberg, a parody on Allen Ginsberg.
Lost in the Funhouse is it's a stone cold classic of postmodern meta literature. It's great. Barbara, do you have?
That's reminding me of I had a good friend who was an artist, and she made T-shirts, and it said, "I am a creative person." Only if you looked in the mirror. So when you wore the T-shirt and looked in a mirror, you could read, "I'm a creative person," in the right way. It was written backwards, I guess. I'm not good at spatial relations, but I remember wearing that in a grocery store, and this person was giving me this confused look, and I couldn't figure out why. And finally, they came up to me and said, "What does that shirt say?" And so the idea of just turning words around or upside down does confuse the world. But it was legible if you looked in the mirror. So so this discussion sort of reminded me of that experience.
There's no thanks, Barbara. There is something that's like just super compelling and complicated about what this poem wants to do and affect in these ways that I think is akin with all of these things that we're kind of talking about, right? All of these other sorts of defamiliarizations or estrangements, or we were just talking about the mirror, Barbara. I mean, that ties back really well to, I think, what Mike was saying earlier about the Alice in Wonderland topsy-turvy through the looking glass quality of this, right? What it means to apprehend something under these different conditions, these conditions of estrangement, these conditions we're not used to, and whether that is like the past or the poem here, or there's a lot at work in this rather short piece. I think that's quite compelling, and I think tells us a lot about the New York school and Barbara Guest as well.
And it's it's surprising. I can't think of the word I'm trying to think of, but you don't really expect that when you look at what is it, 4 lines?
Yeah.
You don't expect all this out of
No, you're right. You're
that
right.
4-line poem. It's like shocking.
Terry, did you were you gonna add something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, did everybody write an essay for this? And if they did, put it in the chat.
Yeah,
Or
good.
this would be fun to read these because mine was totally different. So put the title because I think it's hard to find them.
Oh, it is hard to find. You're right. It's very hard to find them.
You can search, you can see the last commenter, but you don't know this was by me or you or you or you.
Right. I wish there was a better way to search the essays.
I asked Al about that because I wanted to read my essays from like 8 years ago to see where I felt now, and I couldn't find them anywhere. So anyway, and I
think when I took the course for credit, I was asked to give the sites of my essays. Why, I don't know, but boy, that took me forever to hunt through all those essays from 10 weeks to find mine to, I guess, prove I wrote them. So it's a problem.
Did anybody write an essay?
No,
not this year.
Did you write one?
I commented on essays.
Yeah.
Did you write one?
Yesterday I expanded an essay on HD